Now let's graph our cosine functions. So cosine, again, has to do with our x values in our ordered pairs. So we'll take a look at these quadrantal angles, these points here. So this point, x is 1, y is 0. Here at pi over 2, this is 0, 1. At 180 degrees, or at pi, this is negative 1, 0, and down here at 270 degrees, or 3 pi over 2, that is 0, negative 1. So now we're going to take a look at our x values for each of these places. And here at 0, again, that's at 0 degrees. Pi over 2 is 90. Pi is 180, 3 pi over 2 is 270, and then 2 pi we're at 360 degrees. For the most part, we'll be focusing on our radians. So at 0 degrees, our x value is 1. At pi over 2, our x value is 0. At pi, x is negative 1. At 3 pi over 2, x is 0. And at 2 pi, x is 1. And then if we go backwards to negative pi over 2, our x is 0. At negative pi, we're at negative 1. At negative 3 pi over 2, we're at 0. And at negative 2 pi, x is 1. So let's graph these points here. So when we do that, at 0, we are at, and let's label this positive 1 and negative 1. At 0 degrees, our cosine x equals 1 here. Then at pi over 2, it is at 0. At negative 1, at pi, we're at negative 1. At 3 pi over 2, x is 0. And at 2 pi, our x is at 1. If we go backwards here to negative pi over 2, it is 0. And then at negative pi, cosine x is negative 1. At negative 3 pi over 2, cosine x equals 0. And then at negative 2 pi, we're back at 1. And then if we look at the root 2 over root 2, again, that would be at our 0.7s at these points here, positive and negative at the bottom here, just to kind of help us to draw a smoother curve. So here is our cosine curve. Looks very similar to our sine. Okay, very similar. So our domain will be all real numbers. It repeats forever in that pattern. Our range is the same, where it's from 1 to negative 1. So y is between negative 1 and 1. Our maximum value, the top point, the max, at any point on this curve is positive 1. Our minimum is at negative 1. The amplitude is the same. It's half the distance of the min and max value. It's half the distance. So this is our amplitude. So that you can do the formula, but it's 1/2 times 1 minus a minus 1. So minus 1 becomes 2. Half of 2 is just 1. The period is the horizontal length of the graph. It's what repeats. So if we start all the way from the left side here, it goes down, then it stops here, then it goes back up, and then it repeats again. So the period we're going to look at is this one here. So we're going to say that our period is 2 pi. The x-intercepts are a little different. So now our x-intercepts are at pi over 2, 3 pi over 2, negative pi over 2, and negative 3 pi over 2. So those values are at plus or minus pi over 2, plus or minus 3 pi over 2, plus or minus 5 pi over 2, plus or minus 7 pi over 2, and 7 pi over 2, and so on. So let's take a look at stretching and shrinking our graphs. We'll take a look at that in the next video, actually. So this one is just on cosine.